in our work, given the nature of the type of work we do, the quality is so important that if you're good at it, it's going to beget a lot of other business. But if you're not an A player in this space, you're dead.
Welcome to another episode of the Seven Figure Journey podcast, where we explore the ins and outs of the seven figure journey. My name is David Gilliland. I'm one of your hosts. We're delighted to have Scott Wentworth with us today with Wentworth Writing. Is that how you want me to say that, Scott?
Well, that's the URL, but the formal name of the company is Wentworth Financial Communications, which I know is a mouthful, too long to put in an email address or a URL. But we are a content marketing agency that focuses just on financial services. Our clients are asset managers, investment banks, private wealth firms, private equity, accounting, consulting firms, and they hire us to create their thought leadership and other forms of content marketing. And so that's the long kind of official way to say it. The short way is we're a team of ghostwriters who work for financial services companies and take their ideas and turn it into thought leadership and other types of content.
Do you just work for the really big ones, or do you work for those smaller ones of like 5, 10, 20, 30 people, little advisory groups?
It's mostly the large ones. We do have, well, if you look at just the asset management world, for example, which is our biggest vertical, most of our clients are in the top 20 of the largest asset managers in the world, but there are boutique firms, smaller firms that we work with. And so we do have maybe 20% of our clients are in more of that boutique realm, and also in the wealth management space. It's rare to find a wealth management firm that's bigger than 20 people, say. So we do have several clients in that space. But yeah, the vast majority are larger firms, kind of enterprise level, but we do have boutiques, which can be fun to work with too.
So, Scott, how did you get into this? Did you come from the marketing angle, or were you more of the finance person realizing the words aren't getting out right? Or just real brief little
Yeah, it was
creation story?
mostly the marketing side, but even before that, the journalism side. So I got my master's in journalism in 2003 and was trying to break into the magazine industry, wanted to be a sports writer, but couldn't figure out how to get in, couldn't knock it. It's a tough industry, but realized I was an econ undergrad though. And so wanted to find a way to combine my undergrad degree and my love of writing, and ended up getting a job at asset management investment banking firm in Chicago named William Blair. And I was hired into the marketing department there and worked for 11 years there, and eventually became the head writer there, and while I was doing that, had to realize that companies like that were doing more and more content marketing and thought leadership, but the writing often was the bottleneck in executing those projects. And so I had the idea to start a firm going on my own, which I did in 2015, and was lucky to have William Blair as a core client out of the gate, and gradually have grown it from there over the last 10 years.
Very cool. Well, congratulations on being one of the few who use their degree in the lane, right? Like you actually got to use it straight up. Uh, Tell us a little bit. I mean, you've grown. You passed your $1 million mark a while back. You've been going and going. What are some lessons you've learned as you've built your team, growing your business, growing your clientele? What's helped you succeed after passing that $1 million mark?
I think it's really been a focus on, this is going to sound strange, but not scaling. Meaning I think a lot of businesses sort of get in this mindset of, oh, it's all about scale and how do we do things more efficiently. And in our work, given the nature of the type of work we do, the quality is so important that if you're good at it, it's going to beget a lot of other business. But if you're not an A player in this space, you're dead. Meaning that, and I tell people that we're in the type of business where a B gets you fired. So if we sit down and interview a portfolio manager and get 85% of what he said right in the blog that we write on his or her behalf, we're toast. And so it's been sort of this tension of like realizing, okay, there's things I have to do to change my role as we grow, but the top priority has to be maintaining the quality. And if we don't maintain the quality, there is no growth. Like it's going to go the other direction. And so it's been sort of fighting the temptation to do things that are about, well, how do you scale? How do you grow? Like that focus anything that along that line that would hurt the quality or jeopardize the quality, it was always like, okay, well, the quality has to come first, because if we're not A writers and A players, there is no business. So
And
I think that's been the real thing. I kind of reminded myself and my team, and often when I listen to a lot of podcasts and hear a lot of coaches, and it's I just always remind myself that other people's businesses or those sorts of lessons are applicable to an extent, but the nuance of what we do as writers is a little different. And so always realizing, like, look, we're going to grow to the extent that we can find people who can deliver at that A level, is what I tell my team. Like, that's going to be the growth constraint. It's not going to be sales. It's going to be like
it's
finding
going to be
people who can deliver.
talent.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
talent game. That's right.
And a bit of a process to make sure that within that talent, because you're not building widgets, nor are you writing repeatable cut and paste kind of stuff.
Right.
It's ghostwriting, which is an intimacy play. Like you have to build the muscle as a company to be able to constantly help people get under the skin of the people they're going to write for, right? And speak in their voice. Beautiful challenge, but yeah, you could certainly lose your business trying to say how do we crank this out faster and more instead of how do we get more depth and tighter with
Yeah.
these
And
people.
you really you captured it well in saying that the nature of what we're creating, it's not widgets, it's not a physical project or product, but it's also not even, I tell people, we could get hired by 3 different asset managers to write a white paper about the exact same topic. And it's going to be 3 different processes to a degree in terms
Yeah,
of working with those clients, because we have to fit into that client's, we're plugging into their team. And we can't go to a client's asset manager A and say, okay, here's our process, here's how it has to go, and be the same way, because they're all coming to us from different places in terms of like the gaps they have in their marketing team. And so we have to sort of figure out what of our things is repeatable and scalable and what part needs to be adaptable to meet the client. And that's been a challenge, and always a good exercise to sort of figure out and work through, but realizing that you fight as a business owner. I would love it that if everything we could control it and everything was the exact same thing every time,
yeah,
and that would make my life so much easier. But that's not the reality that we work in, and I think it is and that's just kind of a function of the type of service we sell. Is that
yeah,
there's a limit. There's things that are scalable, but that line is probably further to this side of the spectrum than with other types of even consulting engagements. Because again, in a sense, we're sort of it's part execution and part consulting, and so figuring out like what's scalable and what needs to be flexible is the one of the big challenges.
I really like that. And then I mean then it is building your processes around the bottleneck that you choose to remain the bottleneck. Like we want this one. This is the focus where we put all of our energy and time. Everything else can be efficient, but this connection to the customer and really understanding them and getting in their mind in a way that's comfortable for them, that excites them, and
Yeah.
nailing that piece, that needs to intentionally be very inefficient, but well done, right? Like just
Yeah.
zoning in. Very cool. Uh, so great first lesson. Right? Quit focusing on scaling the way everyone else does and focus on we know our bottleneck to growth is how fast can we find and develop the right talent. And it's not an easy one to find out there, right? For what
Mhm.
you're doing.
Yeah.
What other oh
Or
yeah,
I
sorry,
guess
go
real
ahead.
quickly along those lines, like from a hiring perspective, like like you said, it's a talent game, and that's something that we've learned to get faster at and better at, because and you learn that like there's certain things on a resume that tells you a little, but I've got a stack this high of resumes on my desk of people who on paper look like they'd be great at what we do, and are probably or can get to that B level, but getting it, like I said earlier, like a B's doesn't do our clients any good. And so figuring out how do you get more efficient at sorting through those and vetting people on the front end to find the rare talent something we've gotten better at, and it's I tell people the most important thing I do is finding the right people.
Nice, nice. That's a huge nugget for all of us, really. And I don't care what business we're in. I still think that's one of the keys. The most important thing we can do as a leader at this stage in the seven-figure space, especially, is how do I find the right people, and and then how do I build a process that my team can start to do it, and I don't have to be in the middle of finding
Yeah.
the right talent, right?
Yeah.
Really, really great insight. What I want to dive in just a little bit further into that. You said you got a little faster, a little cleaner. What things have helped you take it to that next level where you're like, we're getting better at finding them? Is it still your gut, or have you put some of your gut on paper and into the process?
That's one where we've definitely sort of systematized it and scaled it. Like we have a process for here's the get it on paper. Like the process is going to look like this, and you have kind of um, matrices that you evaluate candidates on, and you like this round of interview, we're looking at this. These people were involved. The second, and then 20% of the people make it to that next round, and that here's who's going to be involved in that process, and here's sort of the writing test and the different aptitude tests we give them, and so that's been, and even using technology to streamline scheduling the interviews and scheduling that how you collect those, that's been helpful, and so that's been, ultimately the gut still matters a lot. Like like I said, you someone's qualifications experience will only tell you a very small amount of whether they can.
It still takes a master to identify a master coming through, right?
Good point. Yeah, but there's been a lot of like structure put in around that. That's been very helpful to speed things up. But even speed aside, the mental energy of just knowing, okay, we have a process that works. We can just plug it into it and let it run is very freeing. To even though it
Yeah.
still may take me hours to go through it with all the candidates, it's still I'm not trying to figure out, okay, what should I do next each time.
Yeah, I love that. And just to pull a couple of the nuggets that I heard in there was, one, you do have multiple steps. Two, you've built matrices, or like, here is how we measure this along this scale and these points of it that everyone can agree. If you had one, two, or three people looking at the same person at that step in the matrix, you would get relatively the same scores for that person. If you can build that predictability that it's outside of a person looking at, the matrix can help with that, right? The matrix
Yeah.
that you're measuring them on. That was one of your keys. And then the other was, there's nothing quite like seeing how they are in the trenches. So let's give them some work, right?
Yeah.
So aptitude tests, writing things, we're getting active, do it now, not what did you prepare and send in, but let's get some stuff. Let's see how you build. Uh, Nothing quite like seeing what they do and what that
Yeah.
feels like.
And the biggest thing, the a secret I've learned is that how people interact in the interview process is how they're going to interact as your employee. Meaning that the way they write their cover email, or to the extent that they do, that's how they're going to be when interacting with your clients. And I mean, we're not hiring junior people. We're hiring mid-career, late career folks. And so the die is pretty well cast. And so the mistakes I've made is sort of like ignoring when there's been red flags and how they engaged in the interview process, and sort of being hopeful that, oh, well, we can teach them how to do these things. But really, I've realized that I pay really close attention to what their cover emails look like, how responsive they are, what they're like on a Zoom call, like that. Those things, that's how they're going to be once you hire them.
Yeah, and that is the work you're having them do with customers. So you're getting to watch it live, right?
Yeah.
Because you've got writers that are interacting with individuals and how that comes across.
Yeah.
Very, very cool. Thank you. Those are fantastic insights. Any other little nugget you would share that we should dive into, or do you want to switch into when we achieve a certain amount of success, we overcome certain barriers. It just means we have new ones to jump through, and we can work on stuff you're doing now.
Yeah, it's probably a pretty good segue into that, or probably has a
Yeah.
foot in those worlds. But another thing, like I've realized, my number one job is finding the right people. My number two job that comes immediately after that or over time after that is getting people once they're on board, like figuring out what they should be doing, the things that they're best at. Because we can hire two writers who for the same level or same position, but even within that, they're going to have different strengths and weaknesses from the types of writing that they are better at, or the asset classes that they know better in our world, or the the types of deliverables that they're better at. And so trying to think like, okay, this person was hired as a writer, that means they're going to be good at these things. I found like one of my sort of art that I need to do as a manager is figuring out, okay, these two people ostensibly they play the same position, but they have different strengths. And so my figuring out like who should be on which project and putting them in positions to succeed is and conversely keeping them out of positions where it doesn't play to their strengths is a big part of my job. And that's where knowing people, knowing the projects, that saves a lot of time from the work that I do on the back end. Like getting people in the right spots in the first place is more than half the battle.
How do you do that?
It takes time. You you put people in different positions and observe how they do in different types of things, and you got to kind of fight the temptation to make your conclusions too soon. Um, and the tension is like you don't want to make your conclusions too soon, but you also need to trust your instincts. Um, and so, but you want to put them in different types of projects, see how they do. And in our world, that might look like one project that's very sort of like very like intellectual white paper where it's pure thought leadership and you're getting really into the technical details. And at the other end of the spectrum, it's something that's very sort of visual driven and more creative and has more of like a advertising angle to it. And it's all about how punchy can you say something for a more retail audience versus an institutional audience, or is this thing mostly words on a page or is it mostly graphics? And you put them in those different positions and you can find out pretty quickly like what they're good at and what they're enjoy doing, what their passion is. And but you got to see it in person. You don't want to, again, it's this tension of you don't want to make conclusions too soon, but you also need to trust your instincts once you see it and go with that.
Very cool. It's funny you're talking through that, and I was like, oh, I know where I fit in that spectrum, but I've never really thought of it that way, and that's why I always struggle to create this other type of content. so,
Yeah.
so anyway, appreciated that, Scott. Um, well, let's do a little segue here. Talent, people, leadership, that seems to be the main driver for business. Your reputation precedes you, and so you know how to get business. If you've got good enough people doing it, then it can come. Now, what are you struggling with now where you're looking, you say, okay, here's my next hurdle, here's the thing I'm thinking about? Because again, success just breeds more challenges to then be able to overcome, and bigger usually, right? It just grows.
Yeah.
That's what entrepreneurship's about.
Yeah. So I'd say two main things. One is, with we have a great team, great people on staff, and and it's really in the last year or two allowed me to sort of elevate my role to be more oversight and being selective of when I sort of get involved in projects, when I can just, let them run with it. But sort of this tension of like now as we have people who, I can fully trust to run projects, do I still need to sort of be involved occasionally just to keep my finger on the pulse of what's going on, or making sure things, if someone's off 5% over a year, that's not a big deal, but over 2 years, that starts kind of, you're missing the target exponentially over time. And so knowing like how much should I sort of be involved and monitor versus being totally hands off saying, hey, this person's earned my trust, let them go, or let them run with it. So that's one thing. And then just thinking about the second one would be how do you help those people figure out how they sort of elevate themselves to being more in that oversight role and have
Yeah.
people under them,
Okay.
and encouraging them to do that, and sort of encouraging, forcing, incentivizing all those things that go into sort of prompting people to get there.
Well, let's talk through just a little bit. Make sure I understand this. You're talking about how do I help people elevate to a higher level of contribution where, yes, I can trust these people, so I don't need to be in this weed. So I can jump up here and start working on the top level things. I can start building bigger and better. Um, how do I free up that time personally? Because that's where you're going to, right? Like I want to be able to trust them. One, so they see the trust, they flourish, they run things, right? They add more value that way. They don't need babysitting. That gives me time to work on higher value added
Mhm.
activities. Fair?
Yes.
Okay. And then the second one is then how do I help them do the same? Then that's a matter of how do I build other people to lead?
Yes.
So I'm talking about how do I lead more instead of do and metal and mesh? And then how do I build others to do the same? I, I think it's such a key and central question. And even for let's talk on the number side, on a revenue line and a value add. And when you're writing or when you're in there working on correcting what's going out to the client, you're doing important work. But it's like $200 an hour work, right? That's the value of the work. Maybe it's $300. Maybe in your space it's $400, but it's in
Yep.
the hundreds an hour work, right? Um, and when we can elevate to a level that we're instead building six other writers, seven, eight other writers, now we're doing $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 an hour work because that work across all of these, they begin to now be better, 10% better for the rest of the year, each one of them, 20% better for the rest of the year, each one of them. That 5% difference you're talking about really multiplies out quite a bit. Um, and then if I can get even to a higher level where I'm setting direction of the right kinds of clients, the right relationships we should have out there in the industry, the new place we should position ourselves to gain the greatest, where could we do work that was valued even higher than what we're doing today, and potentially change the direction of the company. I'm playing with $10,000 an hour work,
Mhm.
right? And so there's an economic reason to move up the value chain instead of continue to just process raw ore here at the base.
Right.
Right? We could do something better. Um, so let's talk through this. Have as you have handed things off, as you have done that, uh, what are some of the cues when you feel more confident in their writing, and what are some of the things that you want to stay more involved in? So let's stick with you feel more confident in their writing. What kinds of things you're like, when they get to this point, I feel pretty good.
Yeah, it's you one is when I look at a draft and it's okay, yeah, I may change a few things here, or this maybe isn't exactly how I did it, but I think the client would be feel like they got their money's worth out of
Okay.
when they open this up. They would say, "Yeah, this looks like investment grade writing," or that's a term we use, or
Yeah.
say kind of
Great.
institutional. So but that's my sense, and when I see that enough from folks, it's like, yeah, I trust and that they're going to be able to do this time in and time out. They've done it in different situations, but then it's also checking in with the clients themselves and asking, how is it going? What, how is the writing? And for us, it's not the the writing is part of it, and it's ostensibly what we're selling, but there's also the sort of the the consulting side of it, or the client management, relationship management, that's equally important, because even for things as simple as, hey, we want you to write a 1,500 word blog post about what fixed income markets are going to do, there's still a lot of discussion and planning and coordinating that has to happen, and the client needs their hand held on, okay, how should this work, how many people should we
Yeah.
interview, those
How
sorts of things.
smooth is it? How easy was the process? Right.
Yeah, and so checking in with clients to say, hey, how is this going, and letting the client tell you, because I've also realized that, yes, I have my standard, and I know what good looks like in my mind, but what good looks like to me isn't necessarily what good looks like to the client.
Yeah.
And the client's version is or both those things matter, but they're not. There's often a lot of overlap, but not entirely.
Great.
So
So let's think through that, and maybe we'll come up with a potential way, right? A potential way of thinking about how do I know when I'm ready to hand it off, let go. These are fully competent individual contributors who don't need oversight anymore in a given area,
mhm,
right? It doesn't mean we're not still leading and guiding them and growing them to their next role, like you alluded to next, but that they're ready in this space. Um, you've figured something out, and I'm not going to say this is the only answer, but I'm going to lean into a strength you already have. When you're finding people to bring on board, you're using a matrix, a little matrix in there to say, here are the key points, and here's how we measure good, great, and not good, right? Like we measure this way. So if we were to take for that role and say, what are the deliverables really? And I'll just throw some out for sake of time because you mentioned them. One, we have investment grade writing, investment level writing. Two, we have a relationship of trust. And three, we have a speed and ease of the process. This is a
mhm,
customer metric of like, oh yeah, this is great. And I don't know if you're how you differentiate, if you're on a speed, if you're on an ease of use, or it's just no, just not bad. Like the process has to be good enough,
yep,
the content has to be high quality. That's what we care about, and then the relationship that they feel like I don't just have a parrot writing with me, but I almost have a thought partner who asks me questions that really gets me to define it clearly. Right?
correct.
That's that consultative side you're talking about. So maybe you have those three things: some kind of consultative touch relationship that's great, process that works smooth, and excellent writing that comes through. Well, ways that you measure those would be important that we could look at it and objectively say where you land in this space. Then, as you meet weekly with each one of your people who report to you, you're able to say, here's where your numbers are today. Now, it's easy on the writing. We can look at writing sample. The consultative stuff, we're meeting weekly to keep helping you build, but we may not get feedback other than monthly or quarterly from a client. So, we're kind of working towards. Um, but the process itself, we could be measuring, well, do we have SOPs written around this process? Are we following those? Could anyone pick it up if you were sick so that, it was just clearly, I have no idea. You'd have to think through whatever
Mhm,
yours is, but some way of seeing and then being able to actively help and encourage that person on that. Now, you have to agree and get those numbers to point to like, if they get to that point, I'm good. I
yep.
step away. I'm done with my training at that point, right? Uh, do you have that defined for these writers right now?
We have sort of client satisfaction surveys or a modified version of Net Promoter Score in those areas, like quality of the writing, quality of the project management, and strategic. Um, but it's a bit squirrely in that you can put numbers to those things, but that's everyone's going to answer them differently, and
That's
so
right.
you
That's a
can't.
little squirrely. That was customer only feedback, right? Let's put in one on the writing sample, and I'm going to call it redlining.
Mhm.
We'll talk about percentage of redlining. When it touches you, how many corrections need to be made?
Yeah, like in our world, it wouldn't be necessarily you wouldn't be counting the number of edits. It's the real metric that matters is how much time I would, if I'm the editor on this,
Perfect.
how
Perfect. I
much
love that. How much
is it
time did it take to get it to the finish line?
correct? That's the thing
I,
that matters. Yeah,
I love that. So put that right in there because you could measure that on every single project that ever comes through and should be a guiding metric for the
yeah,
writing quality, right?
yes, yeah.
All right. So we can get that into place. And then the second piece, as we're helping them through, I've seen editors who were fantastic at developing people and editors who were fantastic at editing content, and they weren't necessarily the same people.
Mhm.
Um, but to sit there and say, okay, I need my editors to do a job that instead of just changing it all, and the people seeing that they changed it and how they changed it, to spend just a little time to ask a question back. That's the training time. This isn't editing time. This is training. To say, hey, you wrote this. Here is the overall vision I'm seeing where you're going. How could you do this more in line with X standard, more in line with this trajectory? What would you do differently? Right? Have them see what would they do differently, right? So can you, through questions, get them to think so that they begin to ask those questions while they write, and so less errors come through and editing time goes down?
And that's one thing we've learned, and still, I wouldn't say I'm very good at this, but I've noticed that as an editor, when you can redline people's things and spend a lot of time inserting comments. Here's why I made this change. Here's what I was thinking of this part. Here's the rationale for the, and send it back to them. That helps a little, but I've noticed like that doesn't seem to have a huge impact in terms of how people internalize that feedback and are able to sort of act on it. What makes a much bigger difference is when you don't change things and you say, here's where I think this needs to go.
Do it again.
Were you thinking, do it, you do it,
Yeah.
and it slows things down and it for everyone. And sometimes, like the nature of our deadlines, we don't have time to do that, and it just has to go. And but the times when we are able to do that, that has a much greater impact on changing or developing people than
For the
having them
next 20 projects, right? Instead of just
yeah.
this one.
So you have to view it as an investment, because
Yeah.
I really have seen when people just see what you changed, they can internalize more surface level things about, okay, well,
Yeah.
we we don't, you turn one long sentence into two shorter ones, or like they or use a semicolon here, and so those sorts of things that they can pick up on. But
Yeah.
that doesn't really matter.
That's
That
not the
doesn't
big
really
deal.
matter. It's not the
It,
structural, like thinking what should be in this and making those decisions. They can't. It's hard for anyone to like see where you ended up and even hear your thinking and say, okay, well, I'm going to internalize that thinking, because it just doesn't work that way, it seems.
Perfect. So you found a way, and what you just shared an example of was that investment. That was, instead of doing the $500 an hour work of editing, because that's a higher level contribution thing. Instead of a $500 an hour work in editing there, you took the time to push it back to give a little vision, and it was going to slow part of our project down, one project, in order to speed up and improve every project this person touches into the future. So instead of $500 an hour work, you just did $5,000 an hour work, or $4,000, whatever your number is on there. That was leading. That was letting go. That was building someone. So in the future, your editing time shrinks for
Hopefully,
all the future ones, right?
you
And,
hope. Now,
and if
you also
not,
realize that if not, then you have to think about,
that's a person issue.
yes,
That's right. Then you found either a fit, the type of things they could do, which role, right, which we went back to at the beginning. It maybe they just need to be in a different role for different kinds of
right,
projects, or a fit for the business, and maybe they need to be in another business,
yeah,
right? And you still got to figure that out. But that's key leadership work, right? That's key leadership work. Is so when you start thinking, how do I let go of things? I like to think instead, what are the things I should be doing? And now what's getting in the way? So the more I'm editing instead of training, the less I'm leading. And so we start thinking, oh, yeah, I have to be building, I have to be moving people to the right places, because as a leader, I have a job to do. I have to set a vision. And let's say around a project, we'll go really micro. Set a
mhm,
vision around this project. The plan on how we're going to get there may be done with the team, right? They may be laying that out. Then I need to be building the team, organizing the work, or having the team do that, but I'm leading and ensuring that's happening right. And then we have to make sure we're hitting the results. So I have the metrics that are in place. We have the rhythms. They are being checked. They only go to the client doing right. And I need to do that as a leader in a way that shows that I deeply care about them and the customers, that they see it, they feel it, they want to give their all for it. Then I'm leading instead of just managing through. But any time that instead I'm spending my time doing editing time, more writing time, more fixing customer relationship time, anytime I'm doing that, I'm in a doing role instead of in a leading role. And when we're small, we're doing both, but I need to figure out, how do I start leaning more and more and more, letting go of piece at a time, more of this doing work. And so that's probably one of the first little secrets, is how do I know when they're ready? Well, most often the question is how do I start intentionally letting go of some things, and which things? And then how do I do that in a way? First, do we have metrics that are measuring how well they're
Mhm.
delivering against that vision, right? And then start thinking, I need to be moving up. I need to be moving up
Yeah.
and doing that work little by little. I I like to use measurements. That's how I know. I know if they're hitting it because we're measuring,
Yeah.
and then I can feel confident. As long as those measurements mean customer success, then we're hitting
Yeah.
on. We kind of dove deep into that one, and time wise, we're running low. Is there anything more you needed from it?
No, that all makes sense. And those are, it's that's sound advice, and it's about, I think it's kind of intentionality is what I heard from you, is that
That's
you
right.
have to realize this is what you need to get to. And so there's things that need to happen in between, and you have to stay focused on that big end. Otherwise, in each project, the decision of what to do is always going to be dive in, do it, get the project as far as it needs to go. And the next
That's right.
project, the same decision will be made. And so, but you have to zoom out and think bigger picture. Well, if you keep doing that each project, that's not getting you anywhere.
Yeah. But as you zoom out and you begin building your team with the clear metrics of success, cheering them on, helping them see the vision where you're trying to go, you do that hard work. Pretty soon, you have 6, 8, 10, 50 people who are just as good or better than you ever were in those roles. And that's awesome.
Yeah,
Right? That's a lot of fun.
that's right.
And you have editors, you're not even touching editing anymore.
Mhm.
And you've got account managers or account executives, you're not touching customers anymore. And instead, you're looking at new opportunities, new places where we can go, how we can influence the industry, right? And those are big things, and relationships that can help you do 10x what you're doing
Yeah.
now. Okay, not that we're after scale, we're after quality. I remember you telling me that, but you are about growth still. So, all right, let's wrap this up. Scott, if someone wants to have a phenomenal ghostwriter in the financial space, how do they get in touch with you?
The easiest way is just to email me, or easiest probably look me up on LinkedIn, Scott Wentworth, Wentworth. And the company again is Wentworth Financial Communications. Easy to find on LinkedIn. Or you can email me at scott at Wentworth Writing, so WRITING.com. That's the easiest way, LinkedIn or email. That's the best way to get in touch with me.
Well, great. Thank you, Scott. Sure appreciated having you on the call today. That wraps up this episode of the Seven Figure Journey podcast. We hope you found the value you were looking for today. If you did, please like, share, do what's necessary to get to other business owners, seven-figure business owners out there. And until next time, keep striving, keep growing, keep learning, and keep caring.